The marble floors of the executive terminal gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Erica Monroe approached the platinum doors of the Meridian VIP lounge. The concierge's eyes swept over her with calculated dismissal, his manicured fingers already reaching for the velvet rope. "I'm sorry, but this space is members only," he declared with practiced arrogance. What he didn't know was that behind him, a massive digital screen was about to rotate, revealing a face that would make his blood run cold. What he didn't know was that this woman he was turning away had just closed the biggest deal in the airport's history. What he didn't know was that his world was about to crumble in the most spectacular way possible. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Erica Monroe had always believed that success spoke louder than assumptions. But as she stood before the polished brass nameplate reading Meridian Executive Lounge, she felt the familiar weight of proving herself all over again. The red-eye flight from Los Angeles had been brutal. 3 client meetings crammed into 4 hours of turbulence, and now she faced a 6-hour layover before her connection to London. Her black Armani blazer was wrinkle-free despite the journey, her briefcase containing contracts worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. The concierge behind the reception desk was a man in his 40s, with silver hair slicked back and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. His nameplate read, Richard Pemberton, Guest Relations Manager. When Erica approached with her boarding pass and identification in hand, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, like a door closing softly but definitively. "Good evening," Erica said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had built an empire from nothing. "I'd like to access the lounge, please." Richard's fingers drummed against the marble countertop as his gaze traveled from her face to her clothes, making calculations that had nothing to do with membership status. "I'm sorry, but this space is members only. We require proof of platinum status or a qualifying business class ticket." Erica reached into her purse and produced her phone, swiping to her airline app. "I have a first-class ticket to London, and I'm a Diamond Elite member with Global Airways." She turned the screen toward him, the digital boarding pass clearly displaying her status. Richard barely glanced at the phone before shaking his head. "I'm afraid our system isn't showing your membership. Perhaps you could try the standard departure lounge on level 2. His tone carried the kind of patronizing helpfulness that felt like a slap wrapped in silk. The dismissal hit Erica like a cold wind, but she had weathered worse storms. "Could you check again? I've been a member for over 5 years. The name is Erica Monroe." She spelled it out slowly, watching as Richard's fingers moved across his keyboard with theatrical reluctance. "Nothing coming up under that name," he said without looking at his screen. "As I mentioned, there are other facilities available that might be more suitable." A businessman in an expensive suit stepped up behind Erica, and Richard's demeanor transformed instantly. "Good evening, Mr. Harrison. Right this way, sir. Your usual table is waiting." The velvet rope lifted as if by magic, and the man passed through without showing any credentials whatsoever. Erica felt heat rise in her chest, but her voice remained steady. "I'd like to speak with your manager, please." "I am the manager," Richard replied, his smile now openly condescending. "And I've explained our policy. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other guests to attend to." The injustice of the moment crystallized into something sharp and cold in Erica's stomach. She had faced this particular brand of institutional racism countless times, from boardrooms to country clubs, but it never stopped feeling like a punch to the gut. Here she was, a woman who had built Monroe Enterprises from a single food truck into a global hospitality empire, being treated like she didn't belong in spaces her own success had helped create. As Erica turned to leave, her heels clicking against the marble with measured dignity, she heard Richard's voice behind her addressing another arrival. "Welcome back, sir. Your membership is always appreciated here." She paused at the threshold, looking back at the seam. The lounge beyond the reception area was populated with travelers who looked nothing like her, their conversations floating through air thick with privilege and assumption. Crystal glasses clinked against mahogany tables, while servers in crisp uniforms moved between leather armchairs like ghosts attending to the comfortable. But as Erica took one final look over her shoulder, something extraordinary began to happen. The massive digital display mounted on the wall behind Richard's desk, which had been cycling through generic advertisements for luxury watches and vacation destinations, suddenly shifted. The screen went black for a moment, then began to load new content with the kind of technological precision that made the entire lounge fall silent. Richard was speaking to another guest, his back turned to the screen, completely unaware of what was unfolding behind him. The other travelers in the lounge began to notice, their conversations trailing off as they watched the display come to life with vibrant colors and sharp resolution. The image that appeared was a professional photograph of Erica Monroe herself, radiant and confident in a navy blue power suit, standing before the skyline of downtown Chicago. Below her image, elegant text began to scroll across the screen. Featured partner spotlight, Erica Monroe, CEO and founder of Monroe Enterprises. A woman near the window pointed at the screen, then at Erica, her mouth forming a perfect circle of surprise. The businessman who had just been seated at his usual table nearly choked on his whiskey as he looked from the display to the woman standing in the doorway. Richard was still chatting with his latest arrival, completely oblivious to the electricity building in the room behind him. "Yes, sir. We pride ourselves on maintaining the highest standards here. We're very selective about our clientele." The display continued its presentation, and Erica watched in fascination as her own story unfolded on the screen. Monroe Enterprises. From food truck to Fortune 500 appeared in bold letters, followed by a montage of images showing the evolution of her business. There was the original truck, painted bright yellow with Erica's Eats stenciled on the side. Then came the first brick-and-mortar restaurant, followed by photos of ribbon-cutting ceremonies at locations across the country. When I started with just a food truck and a dream, Erica's voice began to play through the lounge's sound system from a recorded interview she had given to Business Weekly. "I never imagined that one day Monroe Enterprises would be revolutionizing the hospitality industry." Every head in the lounge turned toward the screen, then toward Erica. The recognition rippled through the space like electricity, and suddenly she found herself the center of attention in a way that made Richard's earlier dismissal seem not just wrong, but absurdly, catastrophically wrong. "Our partnership with Meridian Airport represents a groundbreaking collaboration," her recorded voice continued. "Together, we're creating spaces that welcome all travelers, regardless of background, ensuring that luxury hospitality reflects the diversity of our global community." Richard's guest was staring at the screen with growing alarm. "Isn't that the woman you just turned away?" he whispered, loud enough for half the lounge to hear. The color began to drain from Richard's face as he slowly turned around. His eyes moved from the massive display showing Erica's photograph and accolades to the woman herself, still standing in the doorway with quiet dignity. The same woman he had dismissed moments earlier was now being celebrated on the very wall behind his desk. "Monroe Enterprises has committed to a 5-year, $50 million renovation project," the video continued, "transforming Meridian Airport's hospitality offerings and creating over 500 new jobs in our local community." The silence in the lounge was deafening. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, his professional composure cracking like ice under pressure. The other guests were no longer pretending not to watch, their attention bouncing between the screen and the unfolding drama at the reception desk. Erica remained perfectly still, allowing the moment to unfold naturally. She had learned long ago that sometimes the best response to ignorance was simply to let truth reveal itself. The screen behind Richard continued its presentation, showing architectural renderings of the lounge renovations her company had designed. Featuring modern art from Black and minority artists, sustainable materials, and spaces designed to celebrate rather than exclude. "As part of our commitment to inclusive excellence," Erica's voice declared from the speakers, "Monroe Enterprises is proud to create environments where every traveler feels valued and respected." A young woman in the corner of the lounge started to stand, recognition dawning on her face. "Oh my God, that's Erica Monroe. I read about her in Forbes last month. She's like a genius businesswoman." The man at the usual table was frantically Googling on his phone. "Holy shit," he muttered, not caring who heard him. "She's worth like $200 million. Her company just bought 3 hotel chains. Richard's world was collapsing in real time. The woman he had rejected, the woman he had suggested would be more suitable elsewhere, was apparently the very person his airport most wanted to impress. The woman whose partnership was funding the lounge's entire renovation. The woman whose face was now smiling down at him from a wall-mounted shrine to her success. The display cycled to a new slide. Thank you, Erica Monroe, for choosing Meridian Airport as your vision for the future of travel hospitality. Below this text was a message from the airport CEO. We are honored to partner with a leader who embodies innovation, excellence, and inclusive leadership. Erica finally stepped forward, her heels clicking with purpose against the marble floor. The sound seemed to echo through the suddenly hushed lounge, like a countdown to Judgment Day. Richard watched her approach with the expression of a man watching his career flash before his eyes. It seems, Erica said softly, her voice carrying just enough volume for the entire lounge to hear, that your system may have been mistaken about my membership status. Richard's hands trembled as he looked again at his computer screen, then back at Erica, then up at the massive display that continued to celebrate her achievements. Sweat began to form on his forehead despite the lounge's perfectly controlled climate. Ms. Monroe, he stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. If you could just give me one moment to. But Erica was no longer looking at Richard. Her attention had shifted to the other guests in the lounge, many of whom were now approaching with expressions ranging from admiration to mortification, and having witnessed such a spectacular display of prejudice. The young woman who had recognized her from Forbes was the first to reach her. Ms. Monroe, I'm Sarah Chen from Pacific Tech Solutions. I just wanted to say that your speech at the Women's Leadership Summit last year completely changed how I think about building company culture. An older gentleman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor extended his hand. James Crawford, CEO of Crawford Industries. I've been following your work for years. What just happened here is absolutely inexcusable. As more travelers gathered around Erica, Richard found himself increasingly isolated behind his desk, watching his authority evaporate like morning mist. The screen above continued its tribute, now showing a timeline of Monroe Enterprises' charitable initiatives. Scholarship programs for underprivileged students, disaster relief efforts, and community development projects that had transformed neighborhoods across the country. I established the Monroe Foundation, Erica's recorded voice explained, because I believe that success means nothing if it doesn't lift others up along the way. Every contract we sign, every partnership we form, is an opportunity to create positive change in communities that have been overlooked for far too long. The airport's general manager, David Collins, chose that moment to make his rounds through the executive terminal. He was a tall man with graying temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to handling crises, but nothing had prepared him for the scene that greeted him as he entered the lounge. His eyes immediately went to the display screen, then to the crowd gathered around a familiar figure, then to his guest relations manager who looked like he was about to faint. David had personally overseen the partnership negotiations with Monroe Enterprises, had shaken Erica's hand in his office just 3 months ago when they finalized the renovation contract. Richard, David called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversations like a blade. Could I see you for a moment? The crowd around Erica parted as David approached, his face a mask of professional concern mixed with barely contained fury. He had built his career on customer service excellence, and the scene before him represented everything he had worked to prevent. Ms. Monroe, David said, extending his hand with genuine warmth and obvious embarrassment. I'm David Collins, the general manager. I cannot begin to express how sorry I am for this situation. Erica shook his hand with grace, though her eyes held a steel that made it clear she would not be easily placated. Mr. Collins, I believe there may be some confusion about your lounge's membership policies. David's gaze shifted to Richard, who was now visibly trembling behind the reception desk. There is absolutely no confusion, Ms. Monroe. You are not only welcome in this lounge, you are our most valued partner. Richard, in my office. Now. But Erica held up a hand, stopping David mid-stride. Actually, I think this conversation should happen here, in front of everyone. Transparency has always been important to me. The lounge had gone completely silent, except for the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers and the occasional clink of ice in glasses. Even the servers had stopped moving, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. "Richard," Erica said, turning to face the concierge, who had so confidently dismissed her minutes earlier. "You mentioned that you're very selective about your clientele. I'm curious about the criteria you use for that selection." Richard's mouth opened, but no words came out. The screen behind him chose that moment to display a new slide. Monroe Enterprises, creating inclusive spaces for the future. The irony was so thick it was almost visible. David stepped forward, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "Ms. Monroe, I want you to know that this behavior does not represent the values of Meridian Airport or this establishment. We have spent considerable time and resources training our staff to provide exceptional service to all guests, regardless of what, Mr. Collins?" Erica asked, her voice gentle but probing. "I'm genuinely curious about what factors Richard here considered when he decided I wasn't suitable for this space." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Richard's face had gone from pale to red to a sickly greenish hue as the full implications of his actions became clear. This wasn't just a customer service failure. It was a career-ending disaster that was unfolding in front of witnesses who would undoubtedly share the story far beyond the confines of the lounge. Sarah Chen from Pacific Tech Solutions had her phone out, not to record the scene, but to pull up articles about Monroe Enterprises. "Ms. Monroe," she said, reading from her screen, "it says here that you just acquired 3 major hotel chains in the past 6 months, and that you're planning to revolutionize airport hospitality across North America." "That's correct," Erica replied, her eyes never leaving Richard's face. "We believe that travel should be dignified and welcoming for everyone. It's why we chose to partner with Meridian Airport, because we thought they shared those values." The screen display had moved on to showing architectural plans for the lounge renovation. Sleek, modern designs that incorporated natural materials and art from diverse creators. Spaces designed not to exclude, but to elevate everyone who entered them. James Crawford shook his head in disbelief. "Richard, do you have any idea what you've just done? This woman is transforming the entire industry." But Richard was beyond words, his career imploding in real time as he grasped the magnitude of his mistake. The woman he had turned away wasn't just any traveler. She was the person funding the very renovation that would likely determine his future employment. David Collins turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying the authority of damage control mixed with genuine contrition. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to personally apologize for what you've witnessed today. This is not who we are, and it's certainly not who we aspire to be." Erica raised her hand again, commanding attention with the quiet power that had made her successful in boardrooms around the world. "Mr. Collins, I appreciate your apology, but I think there's a larger conversation to be had here. This isn't just about one employee's poor judgment. This is about systems that allow such judgment to flourish." The display behind Richard had moved to a slide showing employee statistics from Monroe Enterprises. 60% women, 40% people of color in leadership positions, and a 98% employee satisfaction rating. The contrast with what had just occurred couldn't have been more stark. An older woman who had been quietly sipping wine in the corner stood up and walked over to the group. "Ms. Monroe, I'm Margaret Foster, retired federal judge. What I just witnessed was textbook discrimination, and I'd be happy to testify to that fact if needed." Erica smiled at the older woman with genuine warmth. "Thank you, Judge Foster, though I hope it won't come to that. I believe in the power of education over litigation whenever possible." Richard finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Ms. Monroe, I didn't know. I had no idea that I was what exactly?" Erica asked, stepping closer to the reception desk. "Successful? Wealthy? Your business partner? Which of those things should have changed how you treated me?" The question sliced through the air with surgical precision. Richard's mouth moved silently as he struggled to find an answer that wouldn't make his situation worse. But there was no good response to a question that exposed the fundamental flaw in his thinking. The display screen had moved to showing a video montage of Monroe Enterprises' community outreach programs. Images of teen scholarship recipients, rebuild community centers, and job training programs flashed across the screen, while inspirational music played softly through the sound system. "You know what troubles me most about this situation?" Erica continued, her voice remaining calm despite the fire in her eyes. "It's not that you made an assumption about me. People make assumptions every day. It's that you were so confident in that assumption that you didn't even bother to verify my credentials when I offered to show them." David Collins looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. This wasn't just a customer service crisis. It was a public relations nightmare playing out in real time in front of influential witnesses. The airport's reputation, his personal credibility, and their most important business partnership were all hanging in Bren. The balance. "Ms. Monroe," David said carefully, "what can we do to make this right?" Erica walked slowly around the reception area, her eyes taking in every detail of the space that would soon be transformed according to her vision. "Tell me, Mr. Collins, what kind of training do your employees receive regarding unconscious bias and inclusive service?" "We have a standard customer service training program," David replied, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer was inadequate. "Standard," Erica repeated, the word carrying volumes of disappointment. "And how often do you audit your staff's interactions to ensure they're treating all guests with equal respect?" The silence that followed was answer enough. David's face had taken on the expression of a man realizing just how much work lay ahead of him. The screen behind Richard was now displaying a quote from Erica's recent TED Talk. "Excellence isn't about creating spaces for people who look like us. Excellence is about creating spaces so remarkable that they elevate everyone who enters them." Sarah Chen looked up from her phone with excitement. "Ms. Monroe, I just read that you're keynoting the Global Leadership Conference next month. The theme is breaking barriers in business. This is like the universe providing a perfect example." Erica turned her attention to the young entrepreneur with interest. "What's your company working on, Sarah?" "We're developing AI solutions for bias detection in hiring processes," Sarah replied eagerly. "We actually studied Monroe Enterprises' hiring practices as one of our success models." The conversation was shifting away from Richard's mistake towards something more constructive. But the concierge remained frozen behind his desk, like a statue commemorating poor judgment. The other guests were watching this transformation with fascination, witnessing what felt like a masterclass in grace under pressure. Judge Foster approached David Collins with the measured stride of someone accustomed to addressing important matters. "Mr. Collins, I've been traveling through this airport for 20 years. I've seen this particular young man turn away several people who didn't fit his apparent idea of who belongs in exclusive spaces. This isn't an isolated incident." David's expression darkened as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about one evening's mistake. It was about a pattern of behavior that could expose the airport to serious legal liability. "How many others have been turned away unfairly?" James Crawford asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood business consequences. How many potential partners, customers, or simply decent human beings had been made to feel unwelcome here? The questions hit like hammer blows, each one driving home the scope of the problem. Richard had gone from confident gatekeeper to liability in the space of 10 minutes. His comfortable world of assumptions crumbling around him. Erica moved to stand directly in front of the reception desk, placing her hands flat on the marble surface. "Richard, look at me," she said firmly but not unkindly. When his eyes met hers, she continued, "Do you understand what just happened here?" "I made a mistake," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You made an assumption?" Erica corrected. "A mistake implies accident. What you did was make a conscious choice about who you thought deserved respect based on how they looked to you. That's not a mistake. That's a revelation of character." The screen behind Richard displayed a new message. Monroe Enterprises. Building bridges, creating opportunities, changing lives. Below it was a mission statement that seemed to glow with relevance. "We believe that every interaction is an opportunity to either perpetuate division or to choose connection." David Collins stepped forward, his decision crystallizing as he spoke. "Ms. Monroe, effective immediately. All airport staff will undergo comprehensive bias training. We'll also implement a guest feedback system that allows for anonymous reporting of discriminatory treatment. That's a start, Erica replied, though her tone suggested she had more comprehensive ideas. But I think we can do better than that. She turned to address the entire lounge, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had spent years commanding boardrooms and conference halls. This renovation project isn't just about upgrading furniture and installing new technology. It's about creating a culture of genuine hospitality. And that starts with ensuring that every employee understands that respect isn't earned through credentials or status. It's given freely to every human being who walks through these doors. The applause that followed was spontaneous and sustained. Even some of the servers joined in, clearly moved by words that spoke to experiences they had likely witnessed or endured themselves. Richard remained at his post. Though he looked like he would rather be anywhere else on earth, the weight of his error was clearly crushing him, made worse by the fact that it was playing out in front of an audience that included some of the most influential people in the terminal. Ms. Monroe, Richard finally managed to say, his voice thick with shame. I don't know how to apologize for what I did. There's no excuse for it. Erica studied his face for a long moment, seeing genuine remorse mixed with the terror of professional consequences. Richard, you're right that there's no excuse, but there is an opportunity here for growth, if you're willing to take it. The screen had moved to displaying images from Monroe Enterprises' employee training programs, showing diverse groups of people engaged in workshops on cultural competency and inclusive leadership. Every quarter, Erica continued, Monroe Enterprises hosts workshops for hospitality industry professionals. They're designed to help people understand how unconscious bias affects customer service and how to create genuinely welcoming environments. I think you would benefit from attending one of these sessions. The offer was generous beyond what Richard deserved, and everyone in the lounge knew it. This was grace in action, the kind of leadership that separated good executives from great ones. David Collins seized the opportunity. Ms. Monroe, I would like to enroll all of our customer-facing staff in those workshops, if you'd be willing to arrange it. I think that could be arranged, Erica replied, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, but there would be conditions. Name them, David said immediately. First, attendance wouldn't be optional. Every employee who interacts with the public would participate, from entry-level to management. Second, we'd implement a guest experience survey system that tracks not just satisfaction, but feelings of welcome and inclusion. Third, promotion to supervisory roles would require demonstration of inclusive leadership skills. Each condition was delivered with the precision of someone who had thought deeply about systemic change. This wasn't about punishing Richard or making David's life difficult. It was about creating sustainable transformation. The display screen had moved to showing testimonials from employees at Monroe Enterprises properties, people of all backgrounds speaking about how the company's culture had changed their lives and career trajectories. I grew up in foster care, one young man said in a video testimonial. Ms. Monroe didn't just give me a job, she gave me a chance to build a future. Now I'm managing 3 locations, and I'm about to graduate with my MBA. The emotional impact of these stories wasn't lost on the audience. Judge Foster wiped at her eyes with a tissue, while James Crawford nodded with approval at each testimonial. Richard watched the screen with growing understanding of just how significant the person was that he had dismissed. These weren't just business achievements being displayed. They were lives changed, communities transformed, barriers broken down through the kind of leadership he had clearly never experienced. Ms. Monroe, Sarah Chen said suddenly, would you be willing to speak at our company's Diversity and Inclusion Summit next month? After what I've witnessed today, I think our employees could learn a lot from your approach to handling adversity. I'd be honored, Erica replied, then turned her attention back to Richard. And I'd like Richard to attend as well, if he's interested in understanding how this situation could become a learning opportunity, rather than just a career disaster. The offer stunned everyone present, none more so than Richard himself. The woman he had wronged was now offering him a path toward redemption, a chance to transform his ignorance into education. David Collins looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Ms. Monroe, That's incredibly generous of you, but Richard's employment status is not for me to determine, Erica interrupted gently. But I do believe that people can change when they're given the tools and motivation to do so. The question is whether Richard wants to do the work. All eyes turned to the concierge, who had spent the last 15 minutes watching his world turn upside down. The screen above him was now showing the architectural plans for the new lounge, spaces designed to welcome rather than exclude, to celebrate diversity rather than perpetuate division. Ms. Monroe, Richard said, his voice stronger than it had been since the revelation began. I would be grateful for that opportunity. I need to understand how I got to this point, and how to ensure it never happens again. The admission carried weight, because it was clearly difficult for him to make. Acknowledging ignorance in front of witnesses required a kind of courage that Richard had perhaps never been asked to demonstrate before. Erica nodded approvingly. The first step toward change is recognizing the need for it. The second step is being willing to do the uncomfortable work of examining our own biases and assumptions. The display screen had cycled back to Erica's professional photograph, but now it seemed less like a spotlight on Richard's failure and more like an inspiration for what was possible when people chose growth over asana. Defensiveness. David Collins pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. I'm arranging for emergency bias training for all staff within the next 2 weeks. Ms. Monroe, would Monroe Enterprises be able to facilitate something that quickly? We can have trainers here within 48 hours, Erica replied. But David, this can't be a one-time event. Sustainable change requires ongoing commitment and accountability. The conversation had evolved from crisis management to strategic planning, with Erica naturally taking the lead in designing solutions. The other guests listened with fascination as they watched a masterclass in transformational leadership unfold in real time. James Crawford raised his hand like a student in a classroom. Ms. Monroe, my company has struggled with similar issues. Would you be willing to consult with us on implementing some of these same principles? Crawford Industries, Erica said thoughtfully. You're in manufacturing, correct? Heavy equipment and industrial solutions? That's right. We've been trying to diversify our workforce and create more inclusive policies, but we keep running into resistance. From middle management. Erica smiled. Resistance usually comes from fear of change, rather than opposition to fairness. People need to understand that inclusion isn't about taking anything away from anyone. It's about expanding opportunities for everyone. The screen behind Richard was now showing financial data from Monroe Enterprises' diversity initiatives, demonstrating improved performance metrics, higher employee retention, and increased customer satisfaction across all properties that had implemented inclusive practices. The business case for inclusion isn't just moral, Erica continued, it's mathematical. Diverse teams make better decisions, serve customers more effectively, and generate stronger financial results. The data septa is overwhelming. Richard had been listening to every word, and something in his expression suggested that the education was already beginning. The screen above him displayed a quote from a Harvard Business Review study. Companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to outperform their peers. Sarah Chen was frantically taking notes on her phone. This is incredible. You're basically proving that doing the right thing is also the smart thing. It always has been, Erica replied. The challenge is getting people to see past their preconceptions long enough to recognize the opportunity. Judge Foster approached the group with the deliberate pace of someone who had spent decades weighing evidence and rendering verdicts. Ms. Monroe, what you're describing sounds like institutional transformation. That's not easy work. No, it's not, Erica agreed. But it's necessary work. And it starts with moments like this one, when we have a choice between sweeping problems under the rug or using them as catalysts for positive change. The display screen had moved to showing images from the grand opening of Monroe Enterprises' flagship hotel in Chicago. Diverse staff members, happy guests from all backgrounds, and spaces that felt both luxurious and genuinely welcoming. David Collins had finished his urgent phone calls and rejoined the conversation. Ms. Monroe, I've arranged for our entire senior management team to attend whatever training you can provide. This is clearly a company-wide issue that requires company-wide solutions. I appreciate that commitment, Erica said. But I want to be clear about something. This training isn't about political correctness or checking boxes. It's about developing the emotional intelligence and cultural competence necessary to excel in a global marketplace. Richard straightened behind his desk, something in Erica's words seeming to resonate with him. Ms. Monroe, may I ask you something? The question surprised everyone, including Erica. Of course. When I turned you away tonight, what was going through your mind? Were you angry? The question was vulnerable and honest, in a way that suggested Richard was genuinely trying to understand, rather than simply looking for forgiveness. Erica considered her response carefully. I was disappointed but not surprised. I was angry but not shocked. What made me saddest was thinking about all the other people who might have been turned away by similar assumptions. People who didn't have the resources or platform to challenge the treatment. End quote. Her answer hit the room like a bell, clear and resonant with truth. The screen behind Richard chose that moment to display a testimonial from a young woman who had been hired by Monroe Enterprises after being rejected by dozens of other companies. Ms. Monroe saw something in me that no one else would, the young woman said in the video. She didn't just give me a job, she gave me a chance to prove that potential doesn't always come in the package people expect. The emotional weight of the testimonial was palpable. Several people in the lounge were wiping their eyes, and even Richard seemed moved by the story. Sarah Chen looked up from her note-taking with sudden inspiration. What if we documented this whole transformation process, not to shame anyone, but to show how institutions can change when they commit to doing better? Erica tilted her head thoughtfully. That's an interesting idea. Transparency can be a powerful tool for accountability. David Collins perked up at the suggestion. We could create a case study showing how Meridian Airport implemented comprehensive inclusion training. Other airports might learn from our experience. The conversation was taking on momentum, transforming from damage control into visionary planning. The screen behind Richard displayed the timeline for the lounge renovation, showing how the space would be completely reimagined over the next 18 months. Judge Foster raised her hand with judicial authority. If I may suggest, any documentation of this process should include measurable outcomes. Training is meaningless without accountability. Absolutely, Erica agreed. We would track everything from guest satisfaction scores broken down by demographic to employee retention rates and promotion patterns. The data would tell the real story of whether change is actually happening. Richard had been listening intently to the planning discussion, and something had shifted in his demeanor. The panic and shame were still there, but they were being joined by what looked like genuine curiosity. Ms. Monroe, he said hesitantly, if I do attend these training sessions, and if I do the work to understand my biases, would there be a way for me to contribute to this transformation process? The question surprised everyone, including Erica. It suggested that Richard was beginning to see beyond his immediate crisis toward the possibility of becoming part of the solution. Erica studied his face for a long moment before responding. Richard, redemption isn't something that's given to you. It's something you earn through consistent action over time. If you're serious about change, there will be opportunities to demonstrate that commitment. The screen behind him displayed a new slide. Change is possible when we have the courage to examine our assumptions and the commitment to do better. The timing felt almost cosmic, as if the universe was providing commentary on the unfolding drama. David Collins stepped forward with renewed purpose. Ms. Monroe, I want to propose something. What if we made this lounge the pilot program for everything you're describing? Full implementation of inclusive practices, comprehensive staff training, and transparent measurement of outcomes? And if Richard demonstrates genuine change through the training process, Erica added, he could become part of the team helping to train other employees. Sometimes the best teachers are those who have made mistakes and learned from them. The suggestion sent a ripple of surprise through the gathered crowd. Transforming the person who had created the problem into part of the solution was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that had made Erica successful in business. James Crawford nodded approvingly. That's brilliant. Someone who has experienced bias from the inside, would have unique insights into how to prevent it. Richard's expression shifted from terror to something that might have been hope. You would trust me to help train others after what I did tonight? Trust is earned, Erica replied firmly. But I believe in the possibility of growth. If you're willing to do the deep work of understanding your biases and changing your behavior, then yes, I think your experience could be valuable to others. The display screen had moved to showing before and after photos of other Monroe Enterprises transformation projects. Hotels that had gone from struggling properties to award-winning destinations through comprehensive cultural change initiatives. Sarah Chen was practically vibrating with excitement. This could be like a real-time case study in organizational change. We could track metrics, document the process, show other companies how to implement similar programs. Judge Foster raised an eyebrow with judicial skepticism. That's assuming the change actually takes hold. Real transformation takes time and sustained effort. It's easy to make promises in a moment of crisis. Which is exactly why measurement and accountability are so important, Erica responded. We would establish baseline metrics before any training begins, then track progress monthly for at least 2 years. David Collins was nodding enthusiastically, clearly seeing the potential for Meridian Airport to become a model for the entire industry. We could partner with hospitality schools to develop curriculum based on what we learn, turn this crisis into an educational opportunity. The screen behind Richard displayed a quote from one of Erica's business school lectures. Crisis is just another word for opportunity disguised as a problem. The relevance was almost unsettling in its precision. Richard cleared his throat, drawing attention back to himself. Ms. Monroe, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you be willing to personally oversee my training? I think I need to hear these lessons from someone who has experienced what I put you through tonight. The request was bold and vulnerable, the kind of thing that required real courage to voice publicly. Erica considered it carefully, weighing the sincerity in his voice against the magnitude of his earlier behavior. Richard, personal mentorship isn't something I offer lightly. It would require complete honesty about your biases, even the ones that make you uncomfortable to acknowledge. Are you prepared for that level of self-examination? I think tonight has made it clear that I don't have a choice, Richard replied. If I want to be better than the person who turned you away, I need to understand how I became that person in the first place. The admission carried weight because it suggested Richard was beginning to grasp the deeper issues at play. This wasn't just about customer service training. It was about confronting the assumptions and prejudices that had shaped his worldview. Judge Foster leaned forward with interest. Richard, what do you think made you so certain that Ms. Monroe didn't belong here? The question cut to the heart of the matter, and Richard's discomfort was visible as he struggled to articulate thoughts he had probably never examined consciously. I guess I made assumptions based on how she looked, and maybe some preconceived notions about who usually has access to spaces like this. His voice was quiet, but honest. And where do you think those preconceived notions came from? Erica asked gently, her tone more therapeutic than accusatory. Richard was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from face to face around the group. Probably from growing up in environments where everyone looked the same, and from media representations that reinforced certain stereotypes. I never really questioned those assumptions because they seemed normal. The honesty was uncomfortable but necessary, and Erica recognized it as the first step toward genuine change. The screen behind him displayed statistics about representation in leadership roles across various industries, numbers that told the story of systemic exclusion with stark clarity. Sarah Chen looked up from her phone with sudden excitement. Ms. Monroe, I just found an article about your scholarship program. You've put over 500 students through college in the past 5 years? 587 students to be exact, Erica replied with pride. And 89% of them have graduated, with 76% going on to leadership roles in their chosen fields. The numbers were staggering, representing not just individual success stories, but generational change rippling through communities that had been systematically excluded from opportunity. James Crawford shook his head in amazement. That's not just philanthropy, that's social engineering on a massive scale. It's investment, Erica corrected. When you give talented people access to education and opportunities, they don't just succeed, They create value that benefits everyone. Those students are now doctors, engineers, teachers, entrepreneurs. They're solving problems and building businesses and raising families who will never have to face the barriers their parents encountered." End quote. The display screen had moved to showing a map of the United States, dotted with markers representing Monroe Enterprises scholarship recipients. The geographic spread was impressive, covering rural areas and urban centers, tribal lands and inner cities. David Collins was taking notes on his phone, clearly overwhelmed by the scope of what he was learning. "Ms. Monroe, the renovation budget we agreed upon, does it include funding for employee development programs?" "It includes funding for comprehensive cultural transformation," Erica replied. "Employee development is just one component. We'll also be implementing mentorship programs, community partnerships, and guest experience initiatives that create lasting change." Richard had been listening to the conversation with growing amazement at the complexity and thoughtfulness of Erica's approach to business. "Ms. Monroe, can I ask how you developed this philosophy? It seems like more than just good business practice." Erica's expression softened as she considered the personal nature of the question. "Richard, I've been where you are tonight. Not exactly, but I've been in situations where my assumptions about people were challenged, where I had to confront uncomfortable truths about my own biases." The admission surprised everyone present. The idea that someone as successful and seemingly enlightened as Erica Monroe had once struggled with similar issues humanized her in a way that made her leadership even more compelling. "I grew up in a small town in Ohio where everyone looked like me and shared similar economic circumstances," Erica continued. "When I got to college, I had to confront how limited my worldview was. It was uncomfortable and sometimes painful, but it was also liberating." The screen behind Richard displayed photos from Erica's early career. A young woman in business suits that were clearly purchased on a budget, standing in front of her first food truck, shaking hands with early investors who had taken a chance on her vision. "The first time I experienced discrimination in a business setting," Erica said, "I was so focused on proving that the person was wrong about me that I didn't stop to examine whether I might be wrong about other people. It took years for me to understand that fighting prejudice means more than just defending yourself. It means actively working to dismantle the systems that create prejudice in the first place." Judge Foster nodded with the wisdom of someone who had seen countless cases of injustice. "That's the difference between personal success and systemic change. Personal success can coexist with broken systems. Systemic change requires intentional effort to fix the systems themselves." Sarah Chen looked up from her note-taking with sudden realization. "That's why you didn't just accept Mr. Collins' apology and move on. You're using this moment to create something bigger." "Exactly," Erica confirmed. "This situation with Richard isn't really about Richard. It's about all the other Richards working in hospitality, retail, healthcare, education, and every other industry where unconscious bias affects how people are treated." The display screen had moved to showing a video compilation of Monroe Enterprises training workshops in action. Diverse groups of employees engaged in role-playing exercises, difficult conversations, and collaborative problem-solving sessions designed to build empathy and understanding. Richard watched the screen with particular attention, seeing perhaps for the first time what his future BA development might look like. "Those exercises look challenging," he observed. "They are," Erica admitted. "Growth is always challenging. But the alternative is remaining stuck in patterns that hurt other people and ultimately limit your own potential." David Collins had finished making his notes and looked up with renewed determination. "Ms. Monroe, I want to make Meridian Airport a model for the entire industry. What would that look like in practical terms?" Erica smiled, clearly energized by the scope of the vision. "It would mean creating an environment where every traveler feels valued regardless of their background, where employees are equipped with the skills to serve diverse populations effectively, and where the culture itself becomes a competitive advantage." The screen behind Richard displayed customer satisfaction data from Monroe Enterprises properties, showing consistently high ratings across all demographic groups and geographic locations. "But it would also mean being transparent about the work," Erica continued, "publishing data about guest experiences, employee advancement, and community impact, being accountable to the public for the promises we make tonight." James Crawford raised his hand again. What about resistance from employees who might not want to participate in bias training? There's always going to be pushback from people who think this kind of work is unnecessary. Resistance is information, Erica replied thoughtfully. It tells you where the real work needs to be done. You don't overcome resistance by ignoring it or forcing compliance. You overcome it by helping people understand how inclusion benefits them personally. Richard leaned forward with genuine curiosity. How does inclusion benefit someone like me? I mean, I can see how it benefits people who have been excluded, but what's the personal incentive for people who haven't experienced discrimination? The question was surprisingly sophisticated, suggesting that Richard was already beginning to think more deeply about these issues than he had before the evening's events. Richard, think about tonight, Erica said. Your assumptions nearly cost this airport its most important partnership. They could have cost you your job. They certainly cost you respect and credibility. How much better would your life be if you had the skills to see people clearly, rather than through the lens of stereotype? The screen behind him displayed a testimonial from a manager at one of Monroe Enterprises' hotels. The inclusion training didn't just make me better at my job, it made me better at life. I understand my kids better, I'm a better neighbor, I make better decisions because I can see situations from multiple perspectives. The personal testimonial seemed to resonate with Richard in a way that statistics and business cases hadn't. The idea that this work could improve his relationships beyond the workplace was clearly something he hadn't considered. Sarah Chen put away her phone and addressed the group directly. I've been thinking about what you said, Ms. Monroe, about this being bigger than just Richard, or just this airport. What if we created a network of companies committed to this kind of transformation? That's actually not a new idea, Erica replied with a smile. Monroe Enterprises is part of a consortium of businesses working on exactly that. We share best practices, support each other's initiatives, and hold each other accountable for progress. David Collins perked up immediately. Could Meridian Airport join that consortium? If you demonstrate genuine commitment to change, absolutely. But membership requires more than good intentions. It requires measurable progress and ongoing transparency. The display screen had moved to showing logos of companies in the consortium, recognizable names from technology, finance, healthcare, and manufacturing. The diversity of industries represented suggested that this movement toward inclusive practices was broader than most people realized. Judge Foster studied the list of companies with professional interest. That's an impressive coalition. What kind of measurable progress are we talking about? Hiring and promotion data, pay equity analysis, employee satisfaction surveys that include questions about inclusion and belonging, customer feedback that tracks experiences across demographic groups. Erica enumerated. The metrics are comprehensive because the work is comprehensive. Richard had pulled out a notebook and was writing down everything Erica said, his transformation from resistant gatekeeper to eager student happening in real time before everyone's eyes. Ms. Monroe, he said without looking up from his notes. How long does it typically take to see real change in an organization? That depends on how deep the commitment goes, Erica replied. Surface-level changes can happen quickly, but cultural transformation takes years. The key is celebrating small victories while staying focused on long-term goals. The screen behind Richard displayed a timeline showing Monroe Enterprises' own transformation journey, starting from Erica's early struggles as a minority business owner to the company's current status as an industry leader in inclusive practices. Sarah Chen pointed at one of the timeline entries with excitement. Look at that. You went from 12% diverse leadership to 47% in just 3 years. How did you manage that kind of change so quickly? Intentionality, Erica replied simply. We didn't just hope for better outcomes. We redesigned our systems to produce them. Different recruiting strategies, revised job descriptions, structured interview processes that reduced bias, mentorship programs that supported advancement. The list of interventions was extensive, but each item was practical and implementable. David Collins was frantically taking notes, clearly envisioning how similar strategies could work at the airport. James Crawford raised his hand with a business-focused question. What about the financial impact of all these changes? Was there a significant cost involved? The initial investment was substantial, Erica acknowledged. But the return on investment has been remarkable. Lower turnover, higher productivity, better customer satisfaction, increased innovation, and access to markets we couldn't serve effectively before. The screen displayed financial data supporting her claims, showing year-over-year improvements in every major business metric following the implementation of inclusive practices. Richard looked up from his notes with a realization dawning on his face. So when I turned you away tonight, I wasn't just being rude to one person. I was representing values that could actually hurt the airport's business performance. Now you're beginning to understand, Erica said with approval. Discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's economically stupid. It prevents organizations from accessing their full potential. Judge Foster smiled with something that looked like judicial satisfaction. Richard, you're starting to think systemically rather than personally. That's a crucial shift. The observation seemed to energize Richard further. What other assumptions am I making that might be limiting my effectiveness? How do I even begin to identify biases I'm not aware of? That's exactly the right question, Erica replied. Self-awareness is the foundation of everything else. The training programs include assessments that help people recognize their unconscious biases, but the real work happens when you start paying attention to your automatic responses to different people. The display screen had moved to showing video clips from Monroe Enterprises' bias training sessions, with employees engaged in exercises designed to reveal unconscious assumptions and develop greater awareness of their decision-making processes. David Collins looked up from his note-taking with sudden urgency. Ms. Monroe, given what's happened tonight, I feel like we need to accelerate our timeline. How quickly could we begin implementing changes? The training could start within days, Erica replied. But David, rushing the process would be a mistake. Sustainable change requires careful planning and buy-in from leadership. You need to be prepared for the long-term commitment this work requires. Sarah Chen raised her hand with a practical question. What about employees who resist the training or don't show improvement? How do you handle people who just don't want to change? Accountability, Erica said simply. Clear expectations, consistent measurement, and consequences for behavior that doesn't align with organizational values. But in my experience, most resistance comes from fear or misunderstanding, rather than malice. Richard nodded thoughtfully. I think my resistance tonight came from both of those things. Fear of losing control over who I thought belonged here, and misunderstanding about what inclusion actually means. The insight was remarkably self-aware for someone who had been trapped in defensive denial just an hour earlier. The screen behind him displayed a definition of inclusion that seemed written specifically for his situation. Inclusion means creating environments where everyone can contribute their best work without having to hide or minimize parts of themselves. Judge Foster looked at Richard with something approaching approval. That's a sophisticated understanding of the issue. Most people never get beyond thinking of inclusion as just being nice to everyone. Being nice isn't enough, Erica agreed. Inclusion requires systemic thinking and intentional action. It means examining every policy, every process, every interaction for bias, and redesigning them to produce equitable outcomes. The conversation had taken on the rhythm of a graduate seminar, with each participant building on the insights of others. The crisis that had begun with Richard's discrimination was transforming into a collaborative planning session for institutional change. David Collins stood up with sudden inspiration. What if we documented this entire transformation process? Created a playbook that other airports could use? The Meridian model, Sarah Chen suggested excitedly. A step-by-step guide to eliminating bias in customer service. Erica smiled at their enthusiasm. I love the energy, but remember that real change happens slowly and requires constant attention. The playbook would need to emphasize process over quick fixes. The screen behind Richard had moved to displaying quotes from employees who had gone through Monroe Enterprises transformation programs, testimonials that spoke to both professional growth and personal development. The training changed how I see everything, one manager said in a video clip. Not just at work, but in my community, with my family. I became a better human being, not just a better employee. Richard watched the testimonial with intense focus, clearly imagining himself in a similar position months or years down the road. "Ms. Monroe, if I do this work, if I really commit to changing, could I eventually become someone who helps other people avoid the mistakes I made tonight?" "That's entirely up to you," Erica replied. "Redemption isn't a destination, it's a direction. If you choose to keep walking toward becoming better, there's no limit to what you might accomplish." The possibility seemed to energize Richard in a way that simple forgiveness never could. Instead of just escaping consequences, he was being offered the chance to transform those consequences into purpose. James Crawford looked at his watch with surprise. "I can't believe we've been talking for over an hour. This has been more educational than most business conferences I attend." "That's because we're not just talking about abstract concepts," Judge Foster observed. "We're working through a real situation with real consequences and real opportunities for improvement." David Collins stood and addressed the group formally. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed tonight represents both the worst and the best of institutional response to crisis. I want to personally commit that Meridian Airport will become a model for inclusive hospitality, with Ms. Monroe's guidance and with full transparency about our progress." The commitment was public and specific, creating accountability that would be difficult to escape even if enthusiasm waned over time. Erica looked around the group with satisfaction. This is exactly how change happens. Not through blame or punishment, but through honest conversation, shared commitment, and sustained effort. The screen behind Richard displayed a final slide. "Thank you for choosing inclusion. Thank you for choosing growth. Thank you for choosing to be better." Below it was the Monroe Enterprises logo alongside the Meridian Airport logo, symbolizing a partnership that had just become much more meaningful than either organization had originally envisioned. Richard closed his notebook and looked directly at Erica. "Ms. Monroe, I want you to know that regardless of what happens to my job, tonight changed something fundamental in how I see the world. I can't undo what I did, but I can choose to be different going forward." "That's all any of us can do," Erica replied. "None of us can change the past, but we all have the power to shape the future." Sarah Chen was practically bouncing with excitement. "Could we schedule a follow-up meeting in a few months to see how the implementation is going? I'd love to document this transformation for other companies to learn from." "I think that's an excellent idea," David Collins agreed. "Accountability and transparency will be crucial to our success." Judge Foster stood with the deliberate grace of someone accustomed to rendering important decisions. "Ms. Monroe, what you've done tonight is extraordinary. You turned a moment of discrimination into an opportunity for education and growth. That takes remarkable character." "It takes practice," Erica replied humbly. "I've had plenty of opportunities to develop these skills, unfortunately." The honesty of her response struck everyone present. Here was someone who had achieved tremendous success while facing obstacles many of them had never had to consider, and yet she was using her platform to create opportunities for others rather than simply enjoying her achievements. As the group began to disperse, Richard remained at his post, but something fundamental had shifted in his demeanor. The arrogance and dismissiveness were gone, replaced by thoughtfulness and what appeared to be genuine humility. "Ms. Monroe," he called out as she prepared to leave. "When you come back for the next phase of the renovation planning, I hope I'll have the chance to show you that I learned something from tonight." Erica turned back with a smile that held both challenge and encouragement. "Richard, I'm not interested in seeing you perform change for my benefit. I'm interested in seeing you become the kind of person who creates positive change for everyone who encounters you." The distinction was important, and Richard seemed to understand it. This wasn't about impressing Erica Monroe. It was about becoming someone worth impressing. As Erica finally left the lounge, walking through doors that should have been open to her from the beginning, the screen behind Richard's desk continued to cycle through images of Monroe Enterprises' success stories. But now those images carried different meaning, representing not just business achievements, but possibilities for transformation that extended far beyond any single company or airport. David Collins approached Richard's desk with the weight of administrative responsibility heavy on his shoulders. "Richard, we need to talk about what happens next." "I understand, sir," Richard replied. his voice steady despite the circumstances. "I'm prepared to face whatever consequences are appropriate." "The consequences aren't the point," David said, echoing something he had learned from watching Erica handle the situation. "The point is what you do with this experience. Ms. Monroe has offered you an extraordinary opportunity to grow. The question is whether you're ready to do the work." Richard looked up at the screen showing Monroe Enterprises' mission statement: building bridges, creating opportunities, changing lives. The words carried new weight now that he understood what they meant in practice. "I'm ready," he said. And for the first time all evening, his voice carried genuine conviction rather than desperate hope. 3 months later, Richard stood in the same spot behind the reception desk. But everything else had changed. The lounge had been completely renovated according to Monroe Enterprises' inclusive design principles, featuring art from diverse creators, comfortable spaces for families and individuals, and technology that streamlined access while eliminating opportunities for discriminatory gatekeeping. More importantly, Richard himself had changed. The bias training had been intensive and sometimes uncomfortable, forcing him to confront assumptions he had carried for decades. The mentorship sessions with Erica had been even more challenging, requiring him to examine not just his professional behavior, but his fundamental worldview. But the most significant change was in how he saw his role. No longer a gatekeeper determining who deserved access. He had become a facilitator helping every guest feel welcome. The transformation was evident in his interactions, his body language, even his smile, which now reached his eyes when he greeted travelers. "Good evening. Welcome to the Meridian Executive Lounge," he said to a young woman approaching his desk. She was clearly nervous, her boarding pass clutched tightly in her hand and her eyes uncertain. 6 months ago, Richard might have dismissed her immediately. Tonight, he focused on making her feel at ease. "Thank you," she replied quietly. "I'm not sure if I qualify for access. My company bought me a business class ticket, but I've never been in a VIP lounge before." "Let me check your reservation," Richard said warmly, his fingers moving across the keyboard with genuine interest in helping rather than finding reasons to exclude. "Sarah Kim, traveling to Seoul. Yes, your business class ticket absolutely qualifies you for lounge access. Can I show you around and help you get settled?" The young woman's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Really? That would be wonderful. Thank you so much." As Richard guided Sarah through the renovated space, pointing out the business center, the quiet zones, and the diverse dining options, he thought about how different this interaction was from his encounter with Erica Monroe 3 months earlier. The change wasn't just in his training or his knowledge, it was in his heart. The display screens throughout the lounge now rotated through features on guests who embodied excellence in their fields, celebrating achievements from scientists to artists to entrepreneurs. Tonight's featured guest was Dr. James Patterson, a pediatric surgeon who had developed innovative techniques for treating childhood cancer. But Richard also remembered the screen that had changed everything. The moment when Erica Monroe's face had appeared above his desk like a revelation of his own ignorance. That image had been burned into his memory, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder of the person he was committed to becoming. Sarah Kim paused near one of the art installations, a beautiful sculpture created by a Native American artist that incorporated traditional techniques with modern materials. "This is incredible," she said softly. "I feel like I'm in a museum rather than an airport." "That was exactly the goal," Richard replied with pride. Monroe Enterprises designed this space to celebrate the diversity of travelers while providing world-class hospitality. Every piece you see was created by artists from underrepresented communities. The explanation came naturally now, part of Richard's comprehensive understanding of the lounge's mission and values. He had become an ambassador for inclusion not because he had been forced to, but because he had discovered how much richer life became when you opened your mind to different perspectives. As Sarah settled into a comfortable chair with her laptop, Richard returned to his desk, where a framed photo sat next to his computer monitor. It showed him with Erica Monroe and the rest of the training cohort at their graduation ceremony, all of them smiling with the satisfaction of hard work completed and growth achieved. The photo reminded him daily that change was possible, that people could overcome their limitations when they had the courage to confront them, and the support to grow beyond them. But more than that, it reminded him that his transformation had ripple effects, influencing every interaction he had and every guest he served. David Collins approached the desk with his evening report, a routine they had established to track guest satisfaction and identify areas for continuous improvement. "How are things going tonight, Richard?" David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer from observing the interactions throughout the lounge. "Excellent, sir," Richard replied with genuine enthusiasm. "We've had guests from 12 different countries tonight, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. The new accessibility features are being particularly well received." David nodded with satisfaction. The transformation of the lounge had exceeded even his optimistic expectations, but the transformation of Richard had been the most remarkable change of all. "Ms. Monroe is flying through next week," David mentioned casually. "She'll be conducting the quarterly review of our progress." Richard's face lit up with anticipation, rather than anxiety. "I'm looking forward to showing her how much we've learned, and to hearing her feedback on areas where we can continue to improve." The response demonstrated just how completely Richard's relationship with accountability had changed. Instead of fearing evaluation, he welcomed it as an opportunity for growth. As the evening continued, Richard served guest after guest with the kind of attentive care that had become his signature. An elderly gentleman, traveling with a wheelchair, received extra assistance with accessing the charging stations. A family with young children was directed to the quiet family area, with activities to keep the kids entertained. A group of business travelers from Nigeria were greeted with knowledge about their cultural preferences and dietary restrictions. Each interaction was an opportunity to practice the skills Richard had developed through months of intensive training and self-reflection. But more than that, each interaction was a chance to honor the commitment he had made the night Erica Monroe's face appeared on the wall behind his desk. The display screens throughout the lounge continued their rotation, featuring stories of achievement and innovation from around the world. But Richard no longer needed external reminders of the importance of inclusion and respect. Those values had become integrated into his character in a way that made them automatic rather than effortful. Near midnight, as Richard prepared to end his shift, he took a moment to look around the transformed space. The lounge was still busy with travelers from around the world, all of them enjoying an environment designed to welcome rather than exclude. The artwork celebrated diversity, the seating accommodated different needs and preferences, and the staff moved through the space with the confidence of people who knew they were creating positive experiences for everyone they encountered. But the most profound transformation wasn't visible in the renovated space or the improved policies. It was in the recognition that every person who entered the lounge deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, not because of their credentials or status, but because of their fundamental humanity. As Richard gathered his things and prepared to leave, he paused at the spot where Erica had stood 3 months earlier when he had turned her away. The memory still carried the weight of shame, but it also carried something more powerful, the reminder of how much growth was possible when people chose courage over comfort. The screen above his desk displayed its final message of the evening. "Thank you for choosing inclusion. Thank you for choosing growth. Thank you for choosing to be better." The words had become Richard's personal motto, a daily reminder of the person he was committed to becoming. Walking through the terminal toward the employee exit, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The training had been challenging, forcing him to confront beliefs and assumptions he had never questioned. The mentorship with Erica had been even more demanding, requiring him to examine not just his professional behavior, but his fundamental approach to seeing and treating other people. But the most difficult part had been learning to forgive himself for the person he had been while holding himself accountable for becoming better. The balance between self-compassion and self-improvement was delicate, requiring daily attention and constant recommitment to growth. As Richard reached his car in the employee parking garage, he pulled out his phone and sent a text message to his teenage daughter. "Looking forward to our conversation tomorrow about the college diversity programs you're researching. I've learned so much about this topic lately, and I'd love to share some insights." The message represented yet another ripple effect of his transformation. The skills and perspectives he had developed through the training were influencing his parenting, his community involvement, and his understanding of the world in ways that extended far beyond his professional responsibilities. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Richard stood before a conference room full of hospitality industry professionals, sharing the story of his transformation from discriminatory gatekeeper, inclusive leader. The presentation was part of a quarterly workshop series that Monroe Enterprises had developed for the Hospitality Consortium, and Richard had become one of their most effective speakers. "The night I turned away Erica Monroe," he told the audience, "I thought I was protecting the exclusivity of our lounge. What I was actually doing was protecting my own ignorance and limiting my organization's potential." The room was silent as Richard described the cascade of realizations that had followed Erica's patient but firm response to his discrimination. He talked about the training process, the mentorship opportunities, and the ongoing work of examining and addressing unconscious bias. "Change is possible," he concluded, "but only when we have the courage to admit that change is necessary, and only when we have leaders like Erica Monroe who see transformation as an opportunity rather than a threat." The applause was enthusiastic and sustained, coming from an audience of hotel managers, airline executives, and customer service directors who recognized the relevance of Richard's story to their own organizations. After the presentation, Richard was approached by several attendees who wanted to discuss implementing similar programs at their companies. The conversations were energizing, representing the expansion of inclusive practices across the industry. But the most meaningful moment came when a young black woman approached him during the coffee break. "Mr. Pemberton," she said quietly, "I'm a hotel manager in Detroit, and I wanted to thank you for sharing your story. It takes courage to admit when you've been wrong and to work so hard to become better." The interaction reminded Richard of why this work mattered beyond his own redemption. Every person who learned to recognize and address their biases created ripple effects that improved experiences for countless others. As Richard drove home that evening, he thought about the transformation that had begun with a moment of spectacular failure and had become a journey of continuous growth. The screen that had revealed Erica Monroe's identity and achievements had also revealed the possibility of becoming someone better than he had been. The work wasn't finished, would probably never be completely finished, but that was part of what made it meaningful. Every day brought new opportunities to practice inclusion, to choose connection over division, to create spaces where everyone could thrive. Richard's phone buzzed with a text message from Erica. "Saw the video of your presentation today. Proud of the work you're doing and the leader you're becoming. Keep growing." The message filled Richard with warmth and determination. The woman he had wronged had become his mentor, his advocate, and ultimately, the catalyst for becoming the person he was meant to be. As he pulled into his driveway, Richard reflected on the profound truth that had emerged from that night of crisis and revelation. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives come disguised as our worst mistakes, carrying within them the seeds of transformation if we have the courage to plant them and the commitment to tend their growth. The screen that had lit up with Erica Monroe's face had been more than just a technological display. It had been a mirror reflecting both what was wrong and what was possible. And in choosing to see himself clearly in that mirror, Richard had discovered that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about using it as foundation for building a better future. In the months and years that followed, the Meridian Airport VIP Lounge became known throughout the industry as a model of inclusive excellence. Travelers from around the world praised not just the renovated space and improved amenities, but the genuine warmth and respect they experienced from staff members who had been trained to see every guest valuable. Richard continued his work both as a customer service professional and as a trainer and speaker, sharing his story with organizations across the country. His transformation became a case study in business schools and a keynote topic at diversity conferences, proving that change was possible even for those who seemed most resistant to it. But perhaps the most important legacy of that evening was the recognition that inclusion wasn't just a moral imperative or a business strategy. It was a practice that enriched everyone involved. The guests experienced better service, the employees felt more purposeful in their work, and the organization achieved levels of excellence that would have been impossible without embracing the full spectrum of human talent and perspective. The screen that had once revealed Erica Monroe's face in a moment of awkward revelation had become a symbol of possibility, reminding everyone who saw it that transformation was always within reach for those brave enough to choose growth over comfort, connection over division, and hope over fear. And in the end, that choice made all the difference.